This painting was done as part of a plein air challenge. I started at noon and finished about 3. The first thing you need to do is select an area to paint. Then using a viewfinder decide what you want to include in the composition. Then I figured out my eye level and vanishing points because there was a bench that required the use of linear perspective. The tape dots represent the vanishing points. Now I'm adding in water for a wet on wet technique for the grass area. You kind of want to work in chunks around the painting so that your areas do not flow together. I try to use at least 5 colors in every area, so even though the grass is green, you'll see me using lighter colors for lighter areas in the grass and darker colors for darker areas. Leaving whites can be very important. You can either leave them by not putting water down in every area in the beginning, or you can blot some areas out. Move the board to mix it. Now I'm doing a wash for the sky, laying in the water through and getting it everywhere throughout the background. And then I'll go and mix up some colors for a wash. Now I'm going to have about at least 3 different wash colors so that it can blend together. Right now I'm mixing those colors up. Now I'm going to lay them down. So that is paint that has been mixed with water and then laid down. And then you can mix that as much or as little as you want together as well. So notice how I have a part at the top and now at the bottom so that those areas don't blend together. Now you can pull out sky. So you have your whites, your light areas. And you can kind of work through this, so you could do some right away and then some a little bit later. The longer the paint sits on the paper, the more it's going to stain the paper. So if you want there to be different layers coming through, you could work with it that way. Using good paper towel is important for that. I'm just using a little bit of wet on dry because I'm using a really tiny area. And even though this bench looks all pretty much the same color, I'm going to look for where it's a little bit lighter and darker and bring in some other colors. I try to always bring in at least 5 colors. Sometimes it's more than that. I'm using a little dry on dry. The area underneath has been completely dried before I'm coming in and doing that. The drier your brushes, the more light you'll see through it, or in this case the colored background. But it can add a little bit of more color in another layer to your grass or whatever it is that you are painting. So then I went in and added a little bit of more with wet on dry just to add a little bit more detail and emphasize some of the darker areas. You don't want to do this until the grass is completely dry, or whatever area you're adding is completely dry. You cannot add other layers into something until what is underneath is completely dry. Now, the day that I was doing this, it was super windy, which created its very own challenges, but it helped to dry my canvas really quickly, or my watercolor paper. And I'm mixing that. As long as it touches with wet on wet, it'll easily mix together. I'm coming in and painting in the bridge. With a tiny brush, you can still come in and get some real little details. Now, as things get further away, they're going to be more muted. That's aerial perspective. So in the farther things are away from me, I may not use as bright of colors, so more purples. Everything doesn't have to necessarily be gray, but that would be a place where you could add maybe a little bit of a complementary color. And it'll help to kind of mute it. I'm doing wet on wet for the undercoat of the tree. Even though a tree is brown, I'm bringing in a lot of purples, and I've mixed other colors together. Since this is dry, I'll come in with a little bit of dry on dry. You can fix little areas that maybe the water didn't quite get to with a tiny little brush without making it muddy. You have to be careful. You never want to brush something over while it's wet because you don't want to make it muddy. That's why with watercolor we drop colors in, we don't brush them together. It's very different from oil or acrylic. Notice how I am working on one section and then another section. And I didn't go and paint the water in right away because I needed the ground and the grass to dry. I need the sky to dry, otherwise it's all going to blend together. So especially when you're outside and you can't grab a blow dryer, you need to make sure you're working around the page. But I do this no matter what, even if I happen to be in the studio. I really like to do plein air painting, so this is how I typically do it. The day that I was doing this though, like I said, it was very, very, very windy. That is not necessarily my favorite to be outside painting in. But I do love to paint outside. So looking at this bench, I'm looking for like the darker areas and bringing in blues, purples for those darks. Coming in and emphasizing things. Now I'm going to do the water. I'm going to fix with a little brush. Whereas my son is helping me hold it down because it's very, very, very windy on this day. Getting the darker parts that I see on the tree. I still need to come in and get some more of that in. It's not quite done. Came in and I'm doing the cement now. And I'm going to add a little bit of salt to this to give it a little bit of texture. And I'm going to let some of that salt go into a little bit onto the water to get a little bit more of the kind of lights. But I'm just going to do it where I really am seeing the most light. So see there, I sprinkled a little bit of salt on and it kind of just pulls away. I'm going to add a little bit more intensity into the sky because that's all dry. I'm going to start painting in all the leaves. That's really important because we have this big trunk that kind of like cuts right through the page. The leaves are going to help that right now. That was something I was kind of worried about when I picked this spot, but I needed to have an area where I could sit, and this is my finished product.